Hey, good morning. It's Charlie Craven, and I'm going to probably be a little late for work today because I'm going to try to knock this video out real quick before I head in. At any rate, this is honestly one of the most popular flies that we've had in the shop for the last several, 10 years or so. And this is a CDC beadhead pheasant tail, tungsten bead, CDC collar, flashback pheasant tail. So BH, CDC, PT, FB, PT, in short, if you wanted to go around like that. But this is a fly that, regular standard pheasant tail has been a super popular pattern for years and years, and, beadhead pheasant tail has. The CDC pheasant tail, I first started fishing it, a long time ago, tied on a conventional hook. And these days, the jig hook thing has really caught on, so everybody's fishing them on the jig, so I'll show you how to do it on that. And I will say, I typically fish these in fairly large sizes, where a standard pheasant tail, 18, 20, 22 for tailwater kind of stuff. In the case of this CDC pheasant tail, I usually fish this in bigger sizes. 8, 10, 12, 14, 8 and 10 very often. This is a size 10 I've got for you here. And it's, I think they eat it for a small stonefly nymph or a large mayfly. This is an awesome green drake nymph, just for the record. And obviously you can tie it, we're going to tie it here with natural colored pheasant tail fibers, but you can use dyed pheasant tail and tie it in a variety of colors as well. There's all sorts of options. You can do the flashback, you can skip the flashback. There's all sorts of variables that you can kind of kick in there, but they're all tied the same. So with that, I'll get to tying. So the hook I've got here is a Hanak 400, size 10. And I've got a, I think this is a 3.5. Yeah, 3.5 copper slotted tungsten bead that I've slid on there. I'm going to just prop that up, and I'm going to use some, I've got 14-aught Veevus in rusty brown in my bobbin, which will work just fine. You guys have sort of learned I like to use smaller thread so that I've got, however much thread work I need to do, I don't have to worry too much about it. So 14-aught, even on this bigger fly, will be just fine. If you've got 8-aught, that's cool too. But what I want to do is start that thread just up behind the bead, and I'm going to build a little wedge. I want to kind of prop that bead up and build a little wedge up behind the bead, just to sort of hold it in place. Some guys will go in and add a little shot of super glue there, but I don't find the glue necessary. We're going to wedge the fly up against that bead, so it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm going to make a thread base all the way back to the bend. And at that point, I'm going to grab, again, like I said, this is just a standard pheasant tail color, or just natural pheasant tail. So I'm going to grab, a fairly heavy clump. We've got a big fly here. So I've got 12 or 15 pheasant tail fibers, and I want to pull them out at a right angle to the stem until their tips become about even, and then I can strip those off. And I'll just sort of bundle that up in a clump. I'm going to measure that, 2/3 of a shank, 3/4 of a shank. It's fairly long on these bigger size flies. I'm going to tie that in back there at the bend, and then I'll wrap forward over the butt ends. I want to stop just short of the bead. And then for these butt ends, to get them all in one shot, if you take them, get my fingers down here close, and roll those, you can trim those off and get them all with one cut. Now I'm going to take 2 strands of Pearl Firefly. And I like Firefly. Firefly is very similar to Flashabou, and you can use Flashabou in its place. But the reason I'm going to use the Firefly is it just sort of shapes to the fly a little bit better. So I'm going to take those 2 strands, and I don't need them at the center of their length, but I'm going to leave a long front end, and then I'll double everything back and wrap back over it all the way back to the base of the tail. So now I've got 4 strands hanging out back there. And I'm going to take a piece of, in the case of this size 10, Brassie size copper wire, and I'll tie this in here along my near side and wrap back over it all the way to the base of the tail. Now we're going to build the body. So I'm going to grab another 10 or 12 strands of this pheasant tail. Don't try to cheat yourself on these big flies. We're not going to make the wing case out of this clump, so we want, a pretty good sized bundle. And I'll tie these in. I don't have to cut the ends off because I can just sort of run them in. See that loose end right there? See how I can push that forward and catch it? There's a little pro tip for you for the morning. Wrap back over that all the way to the bend. And then I'm going to come back forward. Now, I'm going to build a little bit of a taper here, but you notice I'm still leaving a little bare space up here at the front. That's just going to help with our collar. And here, before I wrap the pheasant tail, I'll put a little shot of head cement down on that thread base. Just helps toughen this fly up a little bit. Pheasant tail is not the toughest material around by any shot, but these are quick and cheap to tie. So now I'm going to start wrapping this pheasant tail, and you can see I'm sort of overlapping the turns as I come forward. I'll tie that off with a couple turns up here at the front end. And again, I'm well short of the bead. And then I'll take all 4 strands of my flash and pull it forward. Now I'm going to counter wrap this rib, so I want to pull this maybe just a little bit toward me and tie it down. I'm going to shorten those ends up just so they're not in my way. So we've got that just slightly off center to my near side. You can see that flash in there. Now I'm going to pick up my copper wire, and I'm going to counter wrap this. Four or 5 turns, just nice evenly spaced turns. And I'll tie that wire off with several tight turns of thread. And then I can helicopter it to break that end off. Just set that aside for the next one. And then I'll, at this point, you really don't need to do this step. This is just habit for me. I fold that flash back. I always do that on flashes. It just makes a more secure tie down, but we've got plenty of thread work going over that, so that's probably not entirely necessary. So now I've got some mini flat braid. This is just braided pearl tinsel. And I'm going to take a piece of this and I'm going to tie it in sort of at the center of its length. And I've got way more than I need here. Let me flip this over just so it's not fighting with me so I could talk about this a little bit. I'm going to tie this in at the center of its length, and I'm going to have one end sort of off to the far side. And then I'll pull this other end sort of over toward my near side. We're going to make the wing case out of that. And I want to double back up on top of that abdomen a bit so you can see those 2 strands are on top. I'll clip that back out of the way so he's not going to argue with us. So now I'm going to take a little bundle of nice thick juicy peacock herl, and I've got 5 or 6 here. And I always tie peacock herl in by its tip end. And I'll pull that down. I just cut those tips to square, and then I'll wrap that peacock herl. And with the peacock, I can get pretty darn close to the bead. The peacock will compress. You can see there's a little neck behind there, so it leaves us a little bit of room. We just want that for our collar. And now I can pull my wing case over the top, and I kind of bring these together and tie them down over the top with a couple of turns. And then again, just to make sure everything's secure, I'll fold those back, and I can come in and cut those out, and I'll give you the top view there. So we've got that little flashback. Now you absolutely could, since I've got it sitting here, I'll do it. You could put some resin on this. A little shot of res on top there, just to toughen that up a little bit, cook them up a little. I don't really try to build anything up. That does toughen that up. But I'm not really trying to build a big swollen wing case on there. I'm just toughening that, make that a little more durable. So now for the collar, you could use any variety of colors of CDC. Typically the jigged version, for some reason, I don't know why, but the jigged version is tied with the brown feather, brown CDC feather. I've always tied mine, particularly in my standard versions, with the natural colored CDC feather. So not a big deal either way. But what I've done here is I've prepped this feather by just stripping the fluff off the end, and then I'll separate the tip so we've got just sort of that little triangle sticking out there. And I'll tie this in with the inside of the feather toward the hook, much like you would like a soft tackle partridge feather. You can see that little stub sticking out the front end. I always fold that back. I'll just sort of sweep that back with my fingers, watch the hook point, and catch that again. Very often, let me turn this around here, very often that little tip is going to be short enough where you don't even have to trim it off, and that's the case here. We don't need to trim it, but if you feel like it, go ahead and trim it. I don't mind. So now I'm going to grab the butt end of that feather in my hackle pliers, and I'll wet my fingers just a bit and stroke these fibers all back to one side. There we go. My thread was moved around. And I'm going to make just a turn or two. You know, you've got the room. That's why we left that room for the collar there. And I'll tie that CDC feather off just behind the bead. And come in and trim that stem out. And then I'm going to build a thread collar just behind the bead, just to sort of anchor everything up. Then I can come in with my whip finisher and build my whip finish right on top there. Here's a little trick since we've got, and I've shown this before, but here it is again. Good tricks are always worth showing twice. So I'm going to take my thread after I've whip finished. So I've already whip finished. I'm going to take some of this, this is Bone Dry Plus. This is the less stinky version of Bone Dry. And I'm going to put a bead of it on the thread. You can see I just wetted the thread with that. And I'm going to make several turns around to get that resin on the thread. And then I unwind those turns and I'll cut that thread out. So what that lets me do is put that resin in there without gooing up my collar. Makes a nice thin coat over the top of the thread. I just cooked that all the way around. But it didn't goo everything up, so kind of a slick little trick when you've got a collar that you don't want to get your head cement or anything snuck into. Now, in the case of this fly, this CDC is not too big. If it was too big, I wouldn't come in, you know, you could randomly go in and kind of trim them off with your scissors, but what I like to do, turn this around, we've got a couple long ones on the bottom here, just tear those off with your fingertips. I like to leave them random, and a little on the long side, you know, they're all the way back to the end of the tail. But that is the CDC Beadhead Flashback Pheasant Tail Jig. So yeah, write that down and tie some of those up. That's a good fly. Catch a lot of fish on that. And don't be turned off because it's a bigger pattern. It surprises me how well it works. Fishing a dry dropper rig with this and something hanging behind it, awfully good combination. But cool little fly, not too hard to tie either, and they're readily available stuff you probably already got. So twist some of those up. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Charlie Craven. Thanks for watching as usual.